The middle of the 16th century marked a remarkable moment for the Medici family of Florence. In 1537, Cosimo de Medici rose to power as the second Duke of Florence, and later assumed the grander title of Grand Duke of Tuscany. His ascent came just a few years after the papacy of his cousin, Pope Clement VII, had ended. Clement himself followed in the footsteps of another Medici pope, Leo XIII, who served as Bishop of Rome from 1513 to 1521. Meanwhile, Florence's influence stretched beyond Italy. In 1533, Catherine de Medici, another family member, married Prince Henry of France, who would become king in 1547. Through Catherine, the Medici bloodline became deeply intertwined with the Bourbon dynasty, shaping the French monarchy for generations. Dukes, popes, queens, kings by the 16th century. The Medici had firmly established themselves among Europe's elite, yet the Medici's golden era in many ways had begun earlier. In the 15th century, when their patronage fueled the Renaissance in Florence, few families have ever left such an indelible mark on history. The story of the Medici begins humbly in Cafagelo, a small Tuscan village about 20 kilometers north of Florence. Their surname, Medici, derives from medico, meaning doctor, hinting at an early ancestor's occupation as a healer. Though of peasant origins, the family prospered, and by the early 14th century had begun lending money at interest. Just as Florence emerged as a leading commercial hub in Tuscany, surpassing Pisa and Siena, banking would soon become the Medici's path to power. Florence in the High Middle Ages, roughly 1000 to 1300, was a place of both brilliance and brutality. The Italian peninsula was a patchwork of city-states. From the Papal States in central Italy to Naples in the south, and republics like Florence, Genoa, Venice, and Milan in the north. Trade flourished across the Mediterranean. Universities began to appear, literacy grew, and the earliest Renaissance literature and artworks by Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, and Giotto were flourishing. At the same time, famines and the Black Death ravaged the population, while rival city-states and mercenary armies waged near constant war. Amid this volatile backdrop, the Medici rose. By the early 1300s, some family members had settled in Florence, engaging in banking. Alvarado de Medici was one such figure. By the 1350s, he had gained wealth, although the family's prominence was still limited. Politics beckoned as well. Salvestro de Medici became a position akin to a mayor during the Ciompi Revolt of 1378 to 1380, a clash between wealthy elites and poorer workers. By then, the Medici already saw themselves as aligned with Florence's wealthy elite rather than the general populace. Giovanni de Vixi, de Medici, son of Averardo, was the architect of the family's meteoric rise, inheriting only a modest portion of his father's estate. He skillfully consolidated the family's financial interests into a single Medici bank. Over the late 1300s and early 1400s, he expanded the bank across Italy, profiting from trade and lending during a period of both conflict and economic growth. By the time of his death in 1429, Giovanni had transformed the Medici Bank into one of the most powerful financial institutions in Italy. Juan es son, Cosimo de Medici, born in 1389, inherited not only wealth, but also ambition and vision. By the 1410s, he was already representing the family at major ecclesiastical and political events, such as the Council of Constance in 1415. After Giovanni's death in 1429, Cosimo combined financial acumen with political influence, shaping Florence from behind the scenes. Rather than seizing outright control like some other Italian dynasties, he manipulated elections, supported allies, and dominated the Signoria. Florence's ruling council, Cosimo's genius extended far beyond politics and banking. He became one of the Renaissance's greatest patrons. He continued his father-ass support for artists and architects like Lorenzo Ghiberti and Filippo Brunelleschi, and commissioned Michelasso to design the Palazzo Medici, a template for future urban palaces. Donatello produced works for Cosimo, including his famous bronze statue of David, the first freestanding nude since Roman times. Cosimo also financed humanist scholars Niccolò Niccoli, Leonardo Bruni, and Porrio Braxolini to recover los Greek and Roman texts and helped establish Florence as a center of learning and philosophy. Even when briefly exiled in 1433 by anti-Medici factions, Cosimo returned triumphantly in 1434, consolidating power and demonstrating his influence. In 1439, he oversaw the Council of Florence, which attempted to reconcile the Western and Eastern churches, bringing leading scholars and philosophers to the city and further cementing his cultural legacy. By his death in 1464, Cosimo had amassed extraordinary wealth and prestige. His grandson Lorenzo, known as Lorenzo il Magnifico, would inherit not only this fortune but also the vision and taste that would define the Medici as both rulers and patrons of the Renaissance. Part 2. After Cosimo de Medici's death in 1464, Florence passed into the hands of his grandson, Lorenzo the Medici, later known as Lorenzo il Magnificent, born in 1449. Lorenzo inherited not only immense wealth, but also the delicate political machinery his grandfather had constructed. Unlike Cosimo, who operated mostly behind the scenes, Lorenzo became the public face of Medici power, lending diplomacy, charisma, and strategic patronage to dominate Florence for over 2 decades. Lorenzo's rule coincided with the apex of the Italian Renaissance. Florence became the heartbeat of European culture, drawing artists, poets, and scholars from across the continent. Lorenzo personally nurtured the talents of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, providing commissions that would define the Renaissance forever. His love for literature and philosophy led him to support figures such as Marsilio Ficino, the translator of Plato, and Pico della Mirandola, whose works bridged classical thought and humanist philosophy. But Lorenzo's Florence was not without danger. Rival families, jealous of the Medici's dominance, plotted to overthrow them. The most infamous of these schemes was the Pazzi conspiracy of 1478. During Easter Sunday Mass in the Florence Cathedral, members of the Pazzi family, along with Archbishop Salviati and other co-conspirators, attempted to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano. The attack succeeded in killing Giuliano, but Lorenzo escaped with only minor wounds. The failed conspiracy only strengthened Lorenzo's grip on power. He exacted brutal revenge. The Pazzi family members were executed, the archbishop hanged from the Palazzo della Signoria, and supporters of the plot were purged from Florence. This episode revealed the precarious nature of Italian politics, where wealth, influence, and public image were constantly under threat. Despite these dangers, Lorenzo maintained the delicate balance between diplomacy and force, keeping Florence stable while cultivating its cultural brilliance. Lorenzo's political skill extended beyond Florence. He deftly managed relations with neighboring cities, including Venice, Milan, and Naples, and navigated the complex influence of the papacy. This skill earned him recognition as one of Europe's most capable rulers. Yet his successes were not purely political. His economic policies and patronage also strengthened Florence's banking system, ensuring the Medici remained wealthy and influential even after his death. However, Lorenzo's death in 1492 marked a turning point. Florence plunged into political instability as subsequent Medici leaders failed to match his vision or authority. Giovanni di Lorenzo de Medici became Pope Leo X in 1513, a position that reinforced the family's influence but also embroiled them in the volatile world of papal politics. Later, Catherine de Medici, another branch of the family, married into the French royal line, intertwining Medici fortunes with the French throne and European diplomacy. Despite these connections, the Medici faced recurring threats to their dominance in Florence. In 1494, Charles VIII of France invaded Italy, sparking the first of several foreign interventions that destabilized the peninsula. Florence temporarily expelled the Medici, only for them to return later under papal and military support. These cycles of exile and restoration became a recurring theme in Medici history. Through all these trials, the Medici's legacy as patrons of art, architecture, and scholarship endured. Under Lorenzo, Florence solidified its reputation as the cradle of the Renaissance. His support for artists and thinkers created masterpieces that still define Western culture, from Botticelli's ethereal paintings to Michelangelo's early sculptures. Lorenzo's vision demonstrated that political power, when combined with cultural patronage, could leave an enduring imprint on history. By the late 15th century, the Medici were no longer merely bankers or politicians. They were a symbol of Florence itself, embodying the city's artistic, intellectual, and economic achievements. Yet their story also foreshadowed the fragility of power. Wealth and influence could be challenged by rivals, foreign invaders, and even the ambitions of family members. The delicate balance between cultural glory and political survival would define the Medici for generations to come. After Lorenzo il Magnifico's death in 1492, the Medici family entered a turbulent period marked by exile, return, and gradual transformation from Florence's bankers to rulers of Tuscany. Lorenzo, as successors, struggled to maintain the delicate balance he had achieved between political power and cultural patronage. Florence briefly expelled the Medici in 1494, following the invasion of Charles VIII of France, but the family returned in 1512 with papal and military support, restoring their influence. During the 16th century, the Medici transitioned from de facto rulers of Florence to hereditary dukes of Tuscany. Cosimo de Medici, who became duke in 1537, consolidated Medici power into a centralized state. He expanded Florence's territory through strategic alliances and military campaigns, transforming the city-state into the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. Cosimo was both a shrewd politician and a patron of the arts, commissioning monumental architecture and supporting artists such as Giorgio Vasari, whose work celebrated Medici achievements and legitimized their rule. Cosimo's successors continued this tradition. Ferdinando I strengthened Florence's economy and navigated international diplomacy, particularly with Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. He developed the port of Livorno into a major trading hub, attracting merchants from across Europe and the Mediterranean. The Medici were no longer just local rulers. They were influential players on the European stage, using marriage alliances, diplomacy, and strategic patronage to extend their power. However, the family's dominance could not last forever. By the late 17th century, the Medici line faced extinction. The last male Medici, Giangaston, died in 1737, and with him ended a dynasty that had ruled Florence and Tuscany for nearly 3 centuries. Their territories were absorbed into the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty, ending Medici political authority, yet their cultural and economic legacy endured. The Medici's most lasting impact was in the arts and sciences. Their patronage helped fuel the Renaissance, producing masterpieces that remain central to Western art, from Botticelli's Birth of Venus to Michelangelo's sculptures and architectural projects like the Medici chapels. They also supported scientific advancement. Galileo Galilei thrived under Medici patronage, dedicating his discoveries to the family. The Medici effectively transformed Florence into a hub of humanist thought, art, and innovation. Even beyond Florence, the Medici shaped European history. Members of the family married into royal houses, including France, producing figures like Catherine de Medici, who became Queen of France and wielded significant political influence during the turbulent French wars of religion. These connections extended the Medici legacy across Europe, intertwining their story with that of the continent's monarchies. The Medici story is a study in contrasts. Immense wealth and cultural brilliance paired with political intrigue, exile, and a constant threat of rivals. From humble beginnings as merchants and bankers, they rose to dominate Florence, became dukes of Tuscany, and influenced the wider European stage. Their legacy endures not only in the political and economic structures they built, but also in the art, architecture, and intellectual achievements they so passionately supported. Ultimately, the Medici exemplify how a family's vision, ambition, and patronage can leave a mark that lasts centuries, shaping a city, a region, and even the course of Western civilization itself. From Cosimo to Lorenzo, from dukes to exiled heirs, the Medici story remains a testament to the intertwined power of money, politics, and culture in shaping history. Even after the end of Medici political rule in 1737, their influence persisted in Florence and across Europe. The city retained the artistic and architectural treasures they commissioned, turning Florence into a lasting symbol of Renaissance brilliance. Museums, palaces, and churches built or decorated under Medici patronage continued to attract scholars, artists, and tourists. Centuries later, preserving the city's status as a cultural capital, the Medici also left a legacy in finance and governance. Their early success as bankers demonstrated the power of organized finance in shaping political landscapes. The Medici Bank pioneered practices in accounting, credit, and international trade that influenced European banking systems for generations. Florence's prosperity under their guidance showed how economic acumen could translate into political power and cultural achievement. Yet, the family's story also serves as a cautionary tale. The Medici rose through ambition, wealth, and strategic alliances, but their decline illustrates the fragility of dynastic power. Without male heirs, the dynasty ended, and political missteps, such as over-reliance on papal favor or neglect of popular support, contributed to their eventual loss of authority. The Medici example highlights that legacy is not guaranteed by wealth or influence alone. It requires careful stewardship across generations. Beyond politics and finance, the Medici's greatest achievement remains in the arts and sciences. They championed humanism, supported revolutionary thinkers like Galileo, and commissioned artworks that continue to define Western aesthetics. By intertwining political authority with cultural patronage, they demonstrated that leadership and creativity could reinforce each other, leaving an indelible mark on history. In the end, the Medici legacy is multidimensional. A story of ambition, innovation, artistic genius, and political complexity. They transformed Florence into a Renaissance powerhouse, influenced European monarchies, and left lessons in both triumph and caution for future generations. Their rise and fall remind us that the intersection of money, power, and culture can create achievements that outlast even the families who initiate them. From modest merchants to rulers, patrons, and cultural icons, the Medici remained one of history's most fascinating families, a testament to the enduring impact of vision, strategy, and the pursuit of excellence. The Medici influence extended far beyond Florence, weaving into the fabric of European politics and dynasties. Through strategic marriages, they connected with the royal houses of France, Spain, and beyond. Catherine de Medici, perhaps the most famous example, became Queen of France and wielded substantial political power, guiding the nation through turbulent religious wars. These alliances allowed the Medici to extend their cultural and political influence across the continent, shaping European history in subtle but lasting ways. Their patronage of education and scholarship also had ripple effects across Europe. Universities and academies benefited from Medici funds, promoting the study of classical texts, philosophy, and the sciences. By supporting intellectual inquiry, they helped lay the groundwork for the scientific revolution, encouraging figures like Galileo to challenge traditional thought and expand human understanding. The Medici approach showed how investment in knowledge could yield both prestige and tangible advancements in society. Even today, the Medici legacy is visible in modern banking, art, and politics. Many practices in finance, from letters of credit to international banking networks, can trace inspiration to the innovations of the Medici Bank. Art museums across the world showcase masterpieces funded by their patronage, and Florence itself remains a living monument to their vision. Tourists walk the streets and admire buildings that were once symbols of Medici power, unaware that they are witnessing centuries of history shaped by one family's ambition and foresight. The Medici story also resonates as a lesson in the balance between power, responsibility, and vision. They show how wealth can be a tool for cultural advancement, how strategic alliances can amplify influence, and how neglecting heirs, succession, or public goodwill can imperil even the greatest dynasties. In essence, their history is a mirror reflecting both the heights humans can reach and the fragility of success. Ultimately, the Medici are not just a family frozen in history. They are an enduring symbol of how money, art, intellect, and politics intersect to shape civilization. Their story continues to inspire artists, historians, and leaders, demonstrating that a combination of vision, opportunity, and bold action can leave a mark that lasts far beyond one lifetime. As the centuries progressed, the Medici family's legacy continued to echo throughout Florence and Europe, long after their political dominance had faded. By the late 17th century, The last of the Medici rulers had passed away, leaving no direct heirs to continue their dynastic line. Yet, the impact of their patronage, political maneuvering, and visionary investments in art, science, and finance remain deeply imprinted in European history. What makes the Medici story remarkable is not simply their wealth or power, but their ability to transform it into cultural and intellectual influence that transcended their own era. One of the most enduring aspects of the Medici legacy is the art and architecture they commissioned. Florence, often called the cradle of the Renaissance, still bears the imprint of Medici ambition in its skyline. De Medici Chapel, de Palazzo Medici, Riccardi, and numerous churches adorned with frescoes, sculptures, and paintings funded by the family are testaments to their vision. Artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Botticelli flourished under their patronage, creating works that not only defined the Renaissance, but also influenced generations of artists across Europe. The Medici understood that supporting art was not merely about personal prestige. It was about leaving a permanent mark on history. Each commission, each sculpture, and each fresco was a statement of power, taste, and intellectual curiosity. Beyond Florence, the Medici impact extended into the broader political landscape of Europe. Strategic marriages linked the Medici to powerful royal families, most notably through Catherine de Medici, who became Queen of France. Her influence during the French Wars of Religion, though often controversial, exemplifies the reach of Medici diplomacy and ambition. These alliances demonstrated that the family's power was not confined to banking or Florentine politics. It had the capacity to shape the destinies of entire nations. Even distant monarchies felt the subtle effects of Medici's strategy, whether through marriages, financial arrangements, or cultural exchange. The Medici were also pioneers in banking, laying foundations for modern financial systems. The Medici Bank, at Height's height, was one of the most sophisticated financial institutions in Europe. It introduced innovations such as double-entry bookkeeping, letters of credit, and international branches, which allowed them to facilitate commerce and trade on an unprecedented scale. These financial tools not only enhanced their wealth, but also promoted economic stability and growth in regions where the Medici operated. Their banking model inspired countless European financiers and remains a reference point for the study of early modern economic systems. In many ways, the Medici demonstrated that financial acumen and political foresight could reinforce one another, creating a cycle of influence that extended far beyond Florence. Education and intellectual inquiry were other areas where the Medici left a lasting mark. By funding libraries, sponsoring scholars, and encouraging the study of classical texts, they contributed to a cultural and intellectual environment that nurtured innovation and critical thinking. Figures such as Galileo Galilei benefited from Medici patronage, allowing them to pursue revolutionary scientific discoveries. The family's support for knowledge fostered an atmosphere where questioning, learning, and experimentation were encouraged, an essential factor in the scientific and cultural advancements of the Renaissance. The Medici model demonstrates how investment in education and intellect can yield societal benefits, far surpassing immediate financial gain. Yet, the Medici story is not solely one of triumph. It is also a narrative of human complexity, ambition, and the inevitable challenges of maintaining power. Internal family rivalries, political rivalries in Florence, and the pressure of public perception often threatened their dominance. The family had to navigate coups, assassinations, and shifting alliances, demonstrating that wealth alone does not guarantee security. Their story is a reminder that power is fragile and must be balanced with prudence, diplomacy, and vision. The very traits that propelled the Medici to greatness, their ambition, strategic marriages, and patronage also carried risks that sometimes imperiled their rule. Modern Florence still resonates with the Medici imprint. Museums, galleries, and public buildings showcase their enduring influence. Tourists from around the world come not only to admire the artistic treasures of the city, but also to walk the streets that once bore witness to Medici power. Contemporary cultural institutions continue to draw inspiration from their model of patronage, illustrating the enduring relevance of their approach. Beyond the visible art and architecture, the Medici serve as a symbol of how vision and investment can shape societies and leave legacies that transcend time. The Medici also offer lessons in leadership and the responsible use of resources. They exemplify how wealth and influence can be channeled to promote societal advancement whether through art, science, or governance, while also highlighting the consequences of neglecting succession, failing to balance ambition with prudence, or underestimating public sentiment. The family's story is both aspirational and cautionary, demonstrating that greatness is not merely measured by accumulation of wealth or power, but by the lasting contributions one makes to culture, knowledge, and society at large. In many ways, the Medici remain timeless. Their story continues to inspire artists, historians, entrepreneurs, and political leaders. It shows how ambition, when coupled with vision, can transform society and leave an indelible mark on history. While the Medici no longer rule Florence or wield the financial power they once did, their influence endures in every corner of the Renaissance art they sponsored, the science they encouraged, and the political connections they forged. They are a testament to the enduring power of vision, creativity, and strategic thinking. Ultimately, the Medici narrative is a story of human potential, the capacity to create, influence, and leave a mark that outlasts one's lifetime. It is a story of triumph and challenge, of art and intellect, of ambition and the delicate balance required to sustain greatness. The streets of Florence, the masterpieces in galleries, and the historical records of Europe all whisper the legacy of a family that understood that true power lies not just in wealth or title, but in the ability to inspire, transform, and endure. The Medici remind us that history is shaped not merely by kings or armies, but by visionaries who dare to dream, invest, and cultivate human potential. They teach that influence extends beyond immediate gains, and that the decisions we make can echo through centuries. From Florence to France and beyond, their story continues to captivate and educate, offering a timeless lesson that greatness is not inherited, is created, nurtured, and wisely applied. In reflecting on the Medici legacy, one cannot help but recognize a profound truth. The family's achievements were never accidental. They were the product of foresight, strategic thinking, and an unrelenting belief in the transformative power of culture and intellect. Their name may belong to the pages of history, but their influence continues to shape art, science, and society, proving that vision coupled with action can truly transcend time. By the 18th century, the Medici family had transitioned from rulers of Florence to a symbol of cultural prestige. Their political clout diminished, but their legacy firmly entrenched. Though the family line would soon come to an end, their influence on European history, politics, and culture continued to ripple outward. The Medici name had become synonymous with art, intellect, and ambition, a brand of excellence that transcended their immediate sphere of power. This period in Medici history is particularly fascinating, as it demonstrates how the remnants of power can evolve into enduring cultural and intellectual influence. Even as political authority waned, the Medici remained deeply involved in diplomacy and international relations. Florence, once a fiercely independent city-state, had become integrated into the broader European network of aristocratic alliances. Members of the family, particularly through marriage into other noble houses, maintained connections with monarchs across the continent. These alliances, while less about direct governance, allowed the Medici to influence European affairs indirectly. They were no longer the de facto rulers of Florence, but their judgment, taste, and strategic counsel were still sought after in royal courts. The family has transitioned from political power to cultural authority is a critical lesson in adaptability. Influence does not always require formal control. Culturally, the Medici continued to define the intellectual landscape of Europe. By this time, the Enlightenment was emerging, emphasizing reason, science, and progress. The Medici, who had long championed education in the arts, were naturally aligned with these developments. Florentine libraries, scientific institutes, and academies, often supported or inspired by Medici initiatives, became centers for Enlightenment thought. Scholars, philosophers, and scientists could study, debate, and innovate in environments that were enriched by centuries of Medici patronage. In this way, the family's earlier investments in culture and knowledge continued to yield influence, even in the absence of political power. The Medici demonstrate that fostering intellectual capital can create a form of soft power that endures beyond immediate authority. The Medici also played a pivotal role in shaping the future of the arts. Their early support for Renaissance masters had laid the groundwork for centuries of artistic excellence. But by the 18th century, they were patrons of a new wave of artistic expression. Artists and architects drew upon the foundations the Medici had established, experimenting with Baroque and neoclassical styles. Florence remained a hub of artistic innovation, in part because the Medici had cultivated an enduring culture of patronage. Their model encouraged not only technical excellence, but also creativity and ambition, inspiring generations of artists to push boundaries. Even after their death, the Medici influence persisted in every brushstroke, architectural detail, and scholarly treatise emerging from Florence. Economically, the Medici legacy continued to shape European finance. While the original Medici Bank had dissolved, the principles it had pioneered modern bookkeeping, letters of credit, and the facilitation of international trade were now embedded in the practices of European commerce. Many modern financial institutions trace their origins, at least conceptually, to Medici innovations. The family's ability to combine financial acumen with strategic alliances allowed them to impact economic systems long after their political reign ended. Their approach highlights a critical truth. Sustainable influence often depends on structures and ideas, not merely on personal authority or wealth. The Medici also served as symbols of the complex interplay between morality, ambition, and power. Historians frequently debate the ethical dimensions of Medici rule. They were brilliant and visionary, yet their accumulation of wealth and influence was often accompanied by ruthless political maneuvering. Intrigues, assassinations, and strategic eliminations of rivals were not uncommon. Yet, the family's lasting contribution to human knowledge, art, and culture complicates any simplistic moral judgment. They illustrate that history often rewards audacity, vision, and strategic thinking, even when accompanied by morally ambiguous actions. The Medici story is therefore as much about the challenges of leadership and ambition as it is about culture and politics. Education remained a cornerstone of the Medici approach. From their earliest days, they recognized that knowledge and culture were essential tools for influence. By the 18th century, their emphasis on learning had cultivated an environment in Florence where scientific inquiry, literature, and philosophy could flourish. Institutions supported by or inspired by Medici philosophy attracted scholars from across Europe, creating a vibrant intellectual ecosystem. Galileo Galilei's earlier work, funded by Medici patronage, had already laid the foundation for modern science. By the 18th century, Florence had become a city where ideas could cross-pollinate and innovation could thrive. The Medici example demonstrates the long-term value of investing in human capital, a lesson as relevant today as it was then. Despite the fading of political authority, the Medici also left a profound mark on societal norms and aesthetics. Fashion, architecture, and etiquette in Florence were deeply influenced by Medici tastes. Their preference for elegance, sophistication, and grandeur became aspirational models for European nobility. Portraits of Medici women and men, adorned in luxurious garments, were widely copied, setting trends across courts. Their influence extended to urban planning, with palaces, and gardens designed to reflect their vision of order, beauty, and prestige. The Medici approach to culture shows how leadership can be expressed through style, taste, and social influence, not merely through laws or decrees. As the Medici line approached its end, their story became emblematic of the broader transition from dynastic rule to cultural legacy. They were no longer rulers, but symbols of Renaissance achievement, intellect, and artistic excellence. Historians, artists, and scholars have long studied their impact, ensuring that the Medici story remains alive in books, galleries, and universities. The family's narrative reminds us that influence is multi-dimensional. It can manifest in art, education, finance, and social norms, and it can outlast the lifetimes of those who wielded it. The Medici also serve as a cautionary tale about the fragility of dynastic power. Despite centuries of careful strategy, the family could not indefinitely sustain its political dominance. Succession crisis, external political pressures, and the limits of human ambition eventually brought their line to an end. Yet, the collapse of their formal authority does not diminish the magnitude of their contributions. Instead, it underscores a profound lesson: that true legacy is not measured solely by titles or territories, but by enduring contributions to human knowledge, culture, and society. Ultimately, the Medici story teaches that influence is best understood as a combination of vision, strategic thinking, and investment in human potential. Wealth and power alone are transient, but when directed toward art, science, and education, they can create legacies that endure for centuries. The family's ability to adapt from political rulers to cultural icons demonstrates resilience, foresight, and the enduring power of ideas. The streets of Florence, the masterpieces housed in its museums, and the scientific principles explored in its academies all testify to the Medici vision. In conclusion, the Medici were more than a family. They were architects of culture, finance, and intellect. Their story encompasses ambition and intrigue, triumph and vulnerability, art and science, power and legacy. By understanding their journey, we gain insight into how vision and action can transcend time, shaping not only the present, but the centuries that follow. The Medici remain a reminder that greatness is not merely inherited, it is cultivated, applied, and nurtured with foresight and care. Even today, their influence resonates in Florence, across Europe, and in the collective imagination of those who study history, art, and leadership. The Medici legacy, therefore, is timeless, a testament to the transformative potential of vision, creativity, and strategic thinking. Through them, we learn that the most enduring power is not always political, but cultural, intellectual, and human. The power to inspire, to innovate, and to leave a mark that the passage of time cannot erase. By the late 18th century, the Medici family's political presence had all but vanished. Florence, once the proud jewel of their dominion, had become integrated into the wider Italian and European political landscape, with foreign powers and emerging states redefining authority. The Medici, however, still held on to their cultural and symbolic significance. Palaces, gardens, and public works they had commissioned centuries earlier remained central to Florentine life, silent reminders of their vision and ambition. Scholars, artists, and philosophers continued to study in institutions shaped by the family's patronage, ensuring that the intellectual vitality they had fostered did not fade with the loss of political power. Even as dynastic succession waned, the Medici's influence on European politics persisted through their intermarriages with other royal families. Though they were no longer sovereign rulers, their bloodlines extended into the courts of France, Austria, and Spain, linking them to powerful dynasties and cementing their role in the continent's aristocratic network. These alliances reflected the enduring strategy of the Medici to wield soft power through culture, intellect, and family connections, even when hard political authority was no longer attainable. During this period, Florence experienced a unique duality. The city mourned the fading of Medici political dominance, but celebrated the cultural legacy that defined its identity. Art, architecture, literature, and scientific inquiry, all nurtured by Medici, patronage continued to flourish, drawing scholars and tourists alike. The Medici had transformed the city into a living museum, where every street, square, and palace echoed their ambition. Their influence had evolved from direct control to an enduring inspiration, proving that power can manifest in multiple forms, not all of them political. The final Medici heirs, aware of their dwindling political relevance, turned increasingly toward philanthropy, culture, and education. They sponsored libraries, funded artistic projects, and preserved the family archives, ensuring that future generations would have access to the knowledge and culture they had nurtured. In doing so, the Medici secured a different kind of immortality, one not defined by titles or armies, but by the persistent resonance of their contributions to human thought and creativity. The story of the Medici concludes not with the clangor of battles or the pomp of coronations, but with the quiet endurance of ideas, art, and intellect. Their rise and fall illustrate the transient nature of political power and the lasting impact of cultural vision. They were audacious and ruthless when necessary, yet their greatest triumph lies in the beauty, knowledge, and innovation they left behind. In the end, the Medici teach a timeless lesson: that true greatness is measured not merely by the territories one controls, but by the ideas one cultivates, the art one inspires, and the intellect one nurtures. Though the last Medici heir passed away, their legacy endures in the streets of Florence, the masterpieces of the Renaissance, and the institutions of learning that continue to shape the world. They remind us that influence, once wisely wielded, can transcend generations, leaving an imprint far deeper and more enduring than any throne or crown ever could. The story of the Medici begins and ends not with the clash of armies or the tremors of political upheaval, but with the quiet persistence of vision. Imagine walking through the streets of Florence, past grand palaces, ornate fountains, and sunlit piazzas. Every corner, every shadowed alley whispers of a family that once held the reins of power with unrelenting ambition, yet understood that true influence could extend far beyond titles and crowns. The Medici were more than rulers. They were dreamers, patrons, and architects of a cultural revolution that transformed the world. But what happens when a dynasty, whose very name is woven into the fabric of a city, begins to fade? How does a family whose ambition once seemed limitless confront its own mortality? This is the final chapter of their story, where the echoes of their power become whispers of legacy, and their triumphs evolve into enduring inspiration. By the mid-18th century, the political might of the Medici had eroded. Florence, once a city shaped and controlled by their deft hands, was no longer the sole theater of their influence. The pressures of European diplomacy, shifting elite, and the inexorable march of history had diminished their direct authority. Yet, even as crowns slipped and titles became ceremonial, the Medici's vision persisted. They had long understood that true power is not measured only by armies or dominions, but by the ideas one cultivates and the culture one shapes. And it was precisely in this realm, art, architecture, philosophy, and science, that their legacy became immortal. Walking through the corridors of the Uffizi Gallery, one can sense their presence. Portraits of saints, popes, and patrons stare silently, each brushstroke a testament to the family's foresight. Sculptures crafted by masters like Michelangelo and Donatello, commissioned under Medici patronage, stand as monuments to human ingenuity and ambition. The Medici had a rare understanding. They recognized that investing in creativity was investing in eternity. The wealth they amassed, the influence they wielded, was transformed into a legacy that no political upheaval could erase. In these works of art, they became timeless, not rulers of Florence alone, but architects of an intellectual and cultural awakening whose ripples are still felt today. The family's decline in political relevance was not without pain. The later Medici heirs watched as opportunities slipped from their grasp, as alliances dissolved, and as the once vibrant political stage they dominated was overtaken by new powers. It would have been easy to fade into obscurity, to surrender to the inevitability of history. But they did not. Even in their twilight, they doubled down on their commitment to culture and knowledge. Libraries were expanded, archives meticulously maintained, and commissions for art and architecture continued. The Medici understood that while kingdoms crumble and armies disband, ideas endure. Their city became a living testament to this principle, a museum of human ambition and aesthetic achievement. It is tempting to romanticize their power, the intrigue, the opulence, the maneuvering of courts and councils, but the deeper story lies in their vision of permanence through creation. They invested not just in marble and paint, but in human potential. Philosophers found refuge under their patronage. Scientists were encouraged to question and to experiment. Artists were given the freedom to redefine beauty. In doing so, the Medici became custodians of the Renaissance itself, steering Europe toward an age where intellect and creativity were as revered as political might. As the last Medici heirs lived out their days, a quiet melancholy accompanied their twilight. There were no grand proclamations of succession, no dynastic triumphs to cement their place in the annals of power. Instead, there were gardens, libraries, and galleries, silent monuments to a family that understood the fleeting nature of worldly authority. The final generation of Medici witnessed the fruits of centuries-long labor, knowing that their role was no longer to rule, but to safeguard a legacy that had outgrown the limitations of monarchy. In their final acts, they became stewards of history, ensuring that the brilliance of Florence and the Renaissance would survive long after their names ceased to command armies or govern states. And yet, what makes the Medici story so profoundly moving is not merely their achievements, but the emotional resonance of their journey, the tension between human ambition and mortality. Power is ephemeral. Life is finite, but vision, culture, and intellect possess a strange immortality. The Medici knew this intuitively. They understood that in nurturing human creativity, in championing thinkers, inventors, and artists, they could transcend the limitations of life and death. When the last Medici heir passed away, Florence did not crumble. The city did not forget. The palaces, streets, and squares they had shaped continued to breathe with their spirit, and more importantly, the art and ideas they fostered carried their essence forward into centuries they would never live to see. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of the Medici legacy is its universality. Though their names were tied to a single city, their influence extended far beyond Florence. Through strategic marriages, their bloodlines entered the courts of France, Austria, and Spain, intertwining with dynasties whose power rivaled their own. More than that, their cultural vision became a blueprint for human achievement. Every Renaissance scholar who studied under Medici patronage, every artist whose work they commissioned, became part of a chain of knowledge and beauty stretching across Europe. The Medici's true empire was not measured in square miles or armies, but in minds illuminated, ideas nurtured, and aesthetics refined. It is difficult not to feel a profound respect for such a family. They were neither flawless nor purely noble. They could be ruthless, ambitious, and calculating when required. But the measure of greatness lies not in the absence of flaws, but in the capacity to shape the world meaningfully despite them. The Medici exemplified this paradox: human, sometimes cruel, yet capable of inspiring beauty and intellect that would endure far beyond their mortal lives. Their story is a testament to the possibility of transforming ambition into legacy, greed into generosity, and power into lasting influence. Standing today in Florence, watching the Arno River reflect the golden glow of a setting sun on its ancient bridges, one can almost hear the echoes of Medici footsteps, the conversations they must have had in candlelit halls, the debates over art and philosophy, the careful plotting of alliances. All of it seems suspended in the atmosphere of the city. The Medici are gone, yet their essence lingers. Every work of art, every architectural marvel, every library, gallery, and museum tells the story of a family that refused to let mortality define them. They remind us that while we cannot escape the passage of time, we can leave behind fragments of ourselves that speak to generations yet unborn. The lesson is both humbling and inspiring. True power is fleeting, but influence can be eternal. The Medici teach us that, while wealth and titles may fade, the cultivation of intellect, the encouragement of creativity, and the preservation of culture are forces that resist the erosion of time. They transformed a city, a continent, and arguably the course of history itself, not by dominating armies or legislating laws, but by nurturing the human spirit. And perhaps that is the most profound form of immortality: the capacity to touch minds, hearts, and souls across the centuries, leaving an imprint that cannot be measured in gold or territory, but in inspiration, thought, and beauty. In the end, the Medici story closes not with a coronation or a battlefield victory, but with the quiet triumph of enduring influence. Their palaces may be empty, their titles long expired, and their political power vanished, yet Florence and indeed the world remains forever shaped by their vision. They teach us that ambition can be noble when paired with creativity, that influence can transcend mortality when rooted in intellect, and that the most profound legacies are those written in art, thought, and human potential. When we walk the streets they once ruled, gaze upon the masterpieces they commissioned or study the libraries they preserved, we are reminded that the Medici did not merely live, they created a world in which their spirit continues to inspire. And as the sun sets over Florence, casting long shadows on centuries-old cobblestones, one realizes the Medici never truly left. They remain in every brushstroke, every marble column, every inspired mind they touched. In a world obsessed with fleeting power, they stand as a reminder that the truest measure of greatness lies not in what one rules, but in what one leaves behind.